Every spring, millions of gardeners make the same mistake on the same weekend. The weather turns, the soil looks workable, the seed catalogues have been sitting on the kitchen table since January, and the urge to get out there and do something becomes, well, pretty much irresistible. So they do what they've always done. They get the fork out, they turn the soil, they rake it flat, break up the clods, maybe scatter some fertilizer, and feel the deep satisfaction of a bed that looks neat and prepared and ready. It feels productive. It feels like the right start to the season. And it is, without question, one of the most damaging things you can do to your garden at that particular moment in the year. What looks like preparation is actually destruction, and the effects of it will quietly undermine everything you try to grow for the next 3 to 4 months in ways that are almost impossible to trace back to that one weekend in early spring when you picked up the fork. I'm not going to tell you to do nothing in spring. There is plenty to do, and I am going to walk you through exactly what it is, in what order, and why each action either helps or harms the system you are trying to build. But the most important thing I can give you before any of that is a clear understanding of what is actually happening in your soil in early spring. Because once you understand it, the impulse to start digging and turning will feel exactly as counterproductive as it actually is. The biology of spring soil is extraordinarily specific and almost entirely invisible to the eye. It is also extraordinarily fragile at the exact moment most gardeners choose to interfere with it most aggressively. Before we get into it, if you want this kind of content coming to you directly, with more depth than I can fit into a video, get on my free email list. The link is in the description below. I send out practical, tested growing knowledge to that list, and it is completely free. Also in the description is the link to the Ouken 4-litre electric composter on Amazon. Here is why this is relevant to a video about spring soil management. One of the most important things you can do for your soil in spring is add finished organic material to the surface without disturbing the soil beneath. The Ouken processes your kitchen scraps, and including cooked food, meat, fish, and dairy that can't go on soil raw, into a dry, stable, fine-textured amendment in 3 to 5 hours that is perfect for spring surface application. You are adding biology and organic matter without any of the digging and disturbance that destroys what is already there. The Amazon link is in the description, and if you buy through it, I earn a small commission that helps keep this channel running. Here is what is actually happening in your soil in early spring, and why it makes this the worst possible time to dig. Through autumn and winter, your soil has been doing something that most gardeners never think about. It has been rebuilding. The microbial community that was partially disrupted by last season's growing, harvesting, and foot traffic has been quietly re-establishing itself. Fungal networks, the thread-like high-fall systems that create soil structure and connect plant roots to nutrient sources, have been extending through the soil matrix, weaving through organic matter, binding soil particles into aggregates, and building the physical architecture that makes good soil feel crumbly and open rather than dense and compacted. This process has been happening slowly through the cool months, driven by the organic matter in the soil and the relative absence of disturbance. By early spring, when the soil temperature at 4 to 6 inches depth reaches around 8 to 10 degrees Celsius, this fungal network is at or near its maximum extent for the year. It has had the entire winter to grow undisturbed. It is now a 3-dimensional web of biological infrastructure that runs through every cubic inch of your soil, connecting organic matter particles, binding mineral particles into aggregates, extending into the decomposing mulch at the surface, and preparing to form the mycorrhizal partnerships with plant roots that will drive the season's growth. This network is also extraordinarily fragile. A single pass of a garden fork through the top 8 inches of soil physically destroys years of fungal network development in seconds. The hyphae, typically 2 to 10 micrometers in diameter, are severed by every movement of every soil particle against every other. The network does not recover in days. It recovers in weeks to months, during exactly the period when your plants are trying to establish root systems and would benefit most from those mycorrhizal connections. The earthworm population is equally vulnerable in early spring for a different reason. Worms have spent the winter in a state of reduced activity, concentrated at depth where temperatures are more stable. As spring soil temperatures rise, they begin moving upward toward the biologically active zone near the surface. In early spring, the worm population is in transit, moving up through the soil profile, re-establishing feeding territories, beginning to breed. Digging the soil at this moment physically kills a proportion of them through direct injury from the tool, exposes the rest to surface conditions, temperature, UV light, desiccation, that are lethal without the protection of surrounding soil, and destroys the tunnel network they built through the autumn and winter that is now part of the soil's drainage and aeration infrastructure. The worms that survive will take weeks to rebuild the populations and tunnel systems that took months to develop. The fertilizer instinct in spring is almost always wrong. Here is why and what the timing actually costs you. The second most common spring mistake after unnecessary digging is applying nitrogen fertilizer to cold soil the moment it becomes workable. The reasoning feels sound. The plants will need nitrogen to grow. The soil looks depleted after winter, and getting a nutrient boost in early is surely better than waiting. It is not. Cold soil biology does not efficiently process or retain soluble nitrogen. The soil bacteria responsible for nitrogen cycling, the nitrification bacteria that convert ammonium to nitrate, the form plants can use, are temperature sensitive and largely inactive below 10 degrees Celsius. Applying soluble nitrogen to cold soil means applying it to a system that cannot use it. The nitrogen does not wait patiently for the soil to warm up. It leaches. Rain moves it down through the soil profile and out of the root zone before temperatures rise enough for plant uptake or bacterial cycling to become efficient. You have paid for fertilizer that ended up in the groundwater. Even when soil temperatures are adequate, applying synthetic nitrogen fertilizer in spring to a soil that is still rebuilding its biological community causes a specific kind of harm that plays out slowly over the following months. Synthetic nitrogen, particularly in ammoniacal or urea form, suppresses the mycorrhizal fungi that your plants depend on for phosphorus uptake and drought tolerance. When plants have access to abundant soluble nitrogen, they reduce their investment in mycorrhizal partnerships because the relationship becomes less essential to them. This sounds like a minor biological detail, but it has practical consequences. Plants that form fewer mycorrhizal associations have smaller effective root systems, are more vulnerable to drought, need more frequent watering, and produce crops with lower mineral density. You have fed the plant and inadvertently weakened its most important support system. The cost is paid across the entire season in ways that are difficult to connect to the early spring fertilizer application. The correct timing for nitrogen-based amendments in spring depends entirely on what form that nitrogen is in. Slow-release organic nitrogen sources, well-aged compost, worm castings, processed kitchen scraps from the electric composter, can and should be applied to the soil surface in early spring because they require biological processing before their nitrogen becomes plant available. By the time the soil has warmed enough for active plant growth, the biology will have been working on these materials for several weeks, and the nitrogen will be releasing in a form and at a rate that matches plant demand. The biology processes it faster as temperatures rise, and plant demand increases as temperatures rise. The system regulates itself without your intervention. So what should you actually do first when you head out to the garden in early spring? Well, the first action in the garden at this time of year shouldn't involve a tool at all. Instead, it should involve your hands, your nose, and just a few minutes of really deliberate observation. Start by pulling back whatever mulch you left on the beds over winter and take a look at the soil surface underneath. What color do you see? Soil that's been biologically active through winter will be noticeably darker than soil that's been left bare and cold. Now, is there any fungal mycelium visible? White or grey thread-like material on the underside of the mulch or on the soil surface? That's a good sign, actually, that decomposition has been happening and the fungal network is active. Push 2 fingers into the top 2 inches of soil. Does it resist or does it give? Does it smell flat and dusty or earthy and complex? And are there worms visible near the surface? These observations tell you the biological state of your soil before you do anything to it, and they should absolutely inform every decision you make about what it needs next. If the soil smells rich and earthy, shows fungal activity, and has worms near the surface under the mulch, your soil has come through winter in good biological condition. The correct response here is to protect and feed what is already there, not to disturb it. On the other hand, if the soil smells flat, shows no fungal activity, and you find no worms in the top few inches, well, you've got a bit of a rebuilding job ahead of you. The approach changes somewhat, but digging still makes things worse, not better. Understanding what you're working with before you start really does determine whether you're helping or harming. The first physical action in a biologically healthy spring bed should be applying a top dress of finished organic material to the surface. Finished compost, processed material from the electric composter, worm castings, or a combination of these. Spread 1 inch to 2 inches across the entire surface of the bed without disturbing the soil beneath. Don't dig it in. Don't rake it into the top layer. Just place it on the surface and leave it be. Earthworms will pull it down over the following weeks, and rain will work it in gradually. The biology at the soil surface will begin colonizing it immediately. This surface application feeds the biology, adds organic matter, and improves soil structure without destroying any of the infrastructure that winter has built. When and how should you apply rice water in spring for the biggest biological impact of the year? Well, spring is the single most effective time to apply rice water to your garden beds, and the reason really comes down to timing. The microbial population in your soil is coming out of winter dormancy. It has slowed down in the cold months and is now responsive to warmth, moisture, and food sources. The moment soil temperatures begin rising consistently above 8 degrees Celsius, the microbial community is primed and ready to respond to a biological activator with dramatic speed. Applying rice water at this moment is a bit like striking a match in a room that has been filling with gas all winter. The conditions for rapid microbial growth are already in place. All the biology needs is the energy source. For spring application, I use fermented rice water at a slightly stronger dilution than I use during the main growing season. 1 part fermented rice water to 5 parts fresh water, rather than my standard 1:7. The higher concentration delivers more lactic acid bacteria and more starch energy directly into soil that is ready to use both aggressively. Apply this to every bed in the garden, not just the ones with visible biological activity. Even beds that showed little sign of biological health in the observation step will respond to the spring rice water application, because there will still be dormant microbial communities present at depth, bacteria and fungal spores that survived the winter in an inactive state and are just waiting for the right conditions to multiply. The rice water provides those conditions. Apply the spring rice water treatment every 3 days for the first 2 weeks of the season. After that, just drop back to the standard maintenance schedule of once or twice a week. The intensive early season application creates a fast and powerful biological restart that sets the tone for the entire growing season. Beds that receive this treatment will be measurably more biologically active by the time transplants go in or seeds germinate, which means better establishment, faster early growth, and a more resilient plant throughout the season. The investment of 2 weeks of intensive application really does pay returns across 5 to 6 months of growing. The mulch decision in spring: what to leave, what to remove, and what to add. If you mulched your beds in autumn and I strongly recommend this practice, you will have a layer of partially decomposed organic material on your beds by spring. What you do with it in early spring is one of the most consequential decisions of the season. The instinct for many gardeners is to clear it away, rake it off, compost it, and start the season with clean, visible soil. This instinct is almost entirely wrong, and I want to explain why clearly enough that it becomes intuitive, rather than just a rule to follow. The partially decomposed mulch on the surface of your beds in spring is not debris. It is active biology. The bottom layer, where the mulch contacts the soil, is the zone of maximum fungal and bacterial activity in the entire growing system at this time of year. It is where the fungal networks extend from the soil up into the organic material. It is where worms are feeding at the surface. It is where the decomposition products that will feed your plants through the season are being produced. Raking it away and throwing it in the compost bin removes this active biological layer and exposes bare soil to the spring conditions, temperature swings, desiccation, ultraviolet and rain compaction that destroy the microbial community at the surface. You are not cleaning the bed. You are removing its most biologically valuable component. What you should do instead is assess what is there and make targeted decisions. If the existing mulch layer is still thick, more than 2 inches of material remaining, leave it entirely in place and add your top dress of compost or processed organic matter on top of it, or work gently into it from above. If the mulch has broken down to less than 1 inch of partially decomposed material, it is doing its job. Leave what remains and add a fresh layer on top to bring the total depth back to 3 to 4 inches. The only circumstance in which removing spring mulch makes sense is if it has gone anaerobic, if it smells of sulfur or sewage rather than earthy decomposition, which indicates it became waterlogged and has been decomposing without oxygen. In that case, remove it, allow the soil surface to breathe for a few days, then apply fresh mulch. But this scenario is the exception, not the rule. If you absolutely must dig, the circumstances that justify it and how to minimize the damage. There are situations where some soil disturbance in spring is genuinely necessary, and the benefits outweigh the biological cost. Severely compacted soil, the kind that forms an impenetrable crust that water cannot penetrate and roots cannot enter, does need physical intervention before the growing season, because in this condition the soil biology cannot function well enough to self-repair within a useful time frame. Similarly, if you are establishing a completely new bed in ground that has never been cultivated, or breaking sod for the first time, some initial disturbance is unavoidable. And if you have specific root crops, parsnips, carrots, deep-rooted beets, that require a friable soil column to develop properly, targeted loosening of the soil they will grow into is justifiable. In these circumstances, the principle is minimum necessary disturbance. Use a broad fork rather than a spade or rotavator wherever possible. A broad fork, 2 long tines on a wide head that you push into the soil and lever back, fractures compaction layers, and creates aeration channels without inverting the soil. Inverting is the critical damage mechanism in spring digging. Turning the soil brings the biologically active top layer to the bottom, where it is oxygen deprived, and brings the mineral subsoil to the top, where it is biologically inert. A broad fork loosens without inverting. The tines create fissures through which air, water, and roots can penetrate, while leaving the soil layers in the positions where the biology has established itself. It is incomparably less damaging than a spade turned to its full depth, and for most spring soil preparation purposes it achieves the same practical result. If you must use a spade for establishing a new bed, removing deeply embedded perennial weeds, or installing infrastructure, do it once, do it thoroughly, and then leave the soil completely undisturbed for at least 3 weeks before planting. This recovery period allows the microbial community to begin re-establishing at the disturbed surface and gives the fungal networks time to begin extending from the undisturbed soil at depth upward into the disturbed zone. Apply rice water to the disturbed bed every 2 to 3 days during this recovery period. Apply a surface layer of compost immediately after disturbance. Cover with mulch. The weeding question in spring, what to pull, what to leave, and the weed that is actually feeding your soil right now. Spring weeds are one of the most misunderstood features of the early season garden. The instinct is to remove everything that is not intentionally planted immediately and thoroughly on the basis that weeds compete with crops and an unweeded bed is a neglected one. The reality is more nuanced and in some cases the opposite of that instinct. Several of the most common early spring weeds are actively beneficial to the soil biology at the moment they appear, and removing them at that stage costs you more than leaving them for a few more weeks would. Chickweed is the best example. It appears in early spring as a dense, low mat of soft-stemmed, small-leaved growth that covers bare soil almost as effectively as mulch. Its shallow root system keeps the soil surface open and creates channels for water infiltration. It fixes small amounts of atmospheric nitrogen through bacterial associations. As it decomposes, either naturally as it dies back in warmer weather or after you cut it and leave it on the surface, it provides a quick-release flush of nitrogen and organic matter to the soil biology. Chickweed left to grow on an unplanted bed in early spring, then cut at soil level and left as a surface mulch before planting, does more for that bed than 3 weeks of bare soil with intermittent fertilizer applications. It is particularly calcium and potassium that are then concentrated in the leaves. When a dandelion leaf decomposes, those deep minerals are released at the surface where shallow-rooted crops can access them. Dandelions in a bed that will be planted in 6 to 8 weeks are doing free soil preparation work. The correct management is not to dig them out, which in any case rarely eliminates them because any fragment of taproot left behind regrows, but to cut the leaves off at soil level repeatedly, leaving the root to continue its work and the leaves to decompose as mulch until planting time. At planting, cut the root at soil level with a knife and leave the root in the ground to decompose in place. The spring actions that compound into a better garden every year, not just this season. Everything described in this video has an effect that extends beyond the current season. The fungal networks you protect by not digging continue to develop and become more extensive every year. The worm population you support by not disturbing them in their most vulnerable seasonal moment breeds and grows and builds soil infrastructure that persists and compounds. The organic matter you add to the surface without disturbing the soil beneath becomes humus, stable, long-term soil carbon, at a rate that is directly proportional to how undisturbed the soil biology is during the transformation process. Every good spring decision you make is a deposit into a biological account that pays interest across every subsequent season. The gardeners who have the most remarkable soil after 10 or 15 years of growing are not the ones who bought the best products or followed the most complex programs. They are the ones who, spring after spring, resisted the urge to interfere with what was already working, who chose observation before action, who fed the surface rather than disrupting the depth, who understood that the soil was not an inert medium to be prepared before the season started, but a living community that the season was already underway for, and that the most important thing they could do was not get in the way of it doing its work. This weekend, before you pick up the fork, go outside and spend 10 minutes looking at your soil. Pull back the mulch, push your fingers in, smell it, look for worms, look for fungal threads, look at the color, listen to what it is already telling you, then come back inside and decide what it actually needs, not what feels satisfying to do, not what you did last year out of habit, but what the soil in front of you right now is asking for. That shift from doing to observing first is the single biggest change most gardeners can make, and it costs nothing but a few minutes of attention. Share this video with someone who is heading out to the garden this weekend with a fork in hand. You might save them a season. And subscribe if you aren't already. There is a lot more of this kind of content coming, and I want you to be here for it.